Hello and welcome to my game shelf. Fall of the Eagle, Axis Invasion of America. This is one that I developed again, and I've been I've got as far as a basic rule book, got all the everything made for a nice prototype, box, parts, pieces, everything else. Played it once. Like to test play it a few more times and get everything ironed out. But this is an interesting subject. It's one that's, of course, totally hypothetical. It's what if the Nazi Germany and the Japanese Empire had invaded the United States sometime during the 1940s, late 1940s, presuming that we had lost the war in the West and something had happened. I don't know, maybe the Germans got the atomic bomb first or whatever. But regardless, whatever happened, the United States was left alone, and the British government had to flee to Canada. So, with that presumption, without requiring any detailed explanations as to how that happened, and it could have happened, but it didn't. This is a hypothetical strategic game on the North American continent in the late 1940s. It is a block strategy game. If you know about block games, I'll show you. But block games provide players with a simple way of a fog of war, so other players can't see the strengths and details of other players' units, and also allows units to lose strength and gain strength by simply rotating the blocks on the board, which is really an elegant way of playing a board game. Anyway, this is one that I developed, and I said it isn't for sale yet. I never really took it that far, but I was planning on taking it that far, and I might still if there is significant interest. This is the first subject I've done on World War II, and I'll show you what's inside the box. Okay, so here we are. We've got, let's get this camera focused. There we are. We got a nice board map. It's not very big. It's maybe about 2 feet across by 1.5 feet tall. It uses hexagonal design movement. So if you're familiar with war games, hexes are a great way of moving pieces around a board. It just provides much more flexibility and realism when it comes to movement. This is a map of the United States and Canada. Mexico's not in it. You've got the Pacific, you've got the Atlantic, the Gulf, Canada. You've got various cities and towns on it that play a very important role in the game. And on the board, you've got each site has destroyed units, reinforcements. The same with the Germans, destroyed reinforcements. You've got a turn track showing the months that go by. The blue months are winter months. The white ones are summer months, so that affects movement and combat in certain parts of the continent. You have resource points, because the game is ultimately a game about collecting and winning resources. And that's essentially how you're able to win the game, as well as capturing very specific towns and cities on the map. Now, there could be 3 players. You can have 2 players, a little harder to do, but you could do 3 players. You can even do 4 players. You could have 1 player as the United States, 1 player as Canada and the remnants of the British Empire. You can play Nazi Germany, and 1 player can play the Empire of Japan. The game comes with these blocks. These would be the American pieces, the green ones. The Germans have the gray ones and some of the black SS units. Japanese are red and white, and the Canadians, British, have the tan and brown. And let's get these out of the way. If you look at the board game from the German perspective, for example, you can see that the German player can see what his pieces are, but the Americans can't. In this case, the Germans are, this is how the game is set up. The Germans are preparing to make their initial landing in the southeastern seaboard coast. And over here in the west, the Japanese are doing the same thing in the west. And there's the Japanese units preparing to make their landings against the American defenses. And the Americans have here in the east, they have their units. General Patton is a general here. And here's the forces available to him at game start. And you have the Canadian British player also has theirs up here. And over here, the Americans against the Japanese, we have General MacArthur and his Pacific Army, West Coast Army. The units I show here are not all of the units that will be at the game start. There's a lot more, of course, in bags to be brought into the game later. The game has a basic manual that I typed up with all the essential rules. Action points are required to make plays. If you're going to attack and move, you have action points to spend. Combat is through 6-sided dice. There are no cards in this game. It's just a pure war game in that regard. Leaders and units have to be activated by leaders. And the Germans and Japanese have leaders as well as the Canadians. Here are examples of combat, how you conduct a combat, how you win a battle. And anyway, so the basic rules are provided here. As I said, I didn't really get into making it, a game ready for market. I got as far as the prototype, did some play testing, typed up a manual. This would have to be edited properly and put in a proper format, and maybe a little bit more play testing done to it. But it's a fun game. It is strictly a war game, not so much a strategy game, but a war game using blocks. Now, when I say blocks, when you have a block, it looks like this. Let's try to get a focus on this. Okay. You see at the top you have two numbers. One is strength, one is movement. The bottom it says militia, which means that's a militia unit. This is an American unit with the white star and green background. The little pips on here represent strength. So militias are weak units. They have a strength of 2, and if they take a hit, you rotate it on the map like this, the board like this. Now it has a strength of 1. If it loses another one, it's eliminated. That's how blocks work, and it's an elegant way of having a war game. There are other units here. For example, let's look at let's pull up a German unit. Let's see, what can we do here? Here we go. Here's a German Wehrmacht unit. It has a strength and movement here. Strength of 4, movement of 3. It's got it's got up to 3 points total instead of 2 like the militia. So it's got 3 steps to lose before it's eliminated from the game. There are also air units in the game. Let's take a look at one of these. Let's see where we go. What can we get? Here we go. Here's an air unit, American air unit. Now this is in the late 40s, so jet power is already being brought into the war. And here's an air unit. Air units help ground units fight, and they can be placed where battles are to assist in battles. So that's how they work. And it's really a pretty basic game. It isn't very complicated. The objective, of course, is the Japanese is to move inland and capture specific cities. These specific cities are, once you get the coastal cities, the Japanese Salt Lake City, Denver, Kansas City, Nashville. Chicago is the inner capital. There's a little Capitol building on there. So when Washington, D.C. falls, which is right there, this becomes the next capital of the United States. Same with when Ottawa falls, then Winnipeg becomes the capital of Canada. So they move inland to try to get away. The Germans have to capture basic Washington, D.C., New York City, Pittsburgh, Nashville, and Chicago. And then, of course, wherever the Japanese and Germans meet on the board, that's where the game will end. The Americans can still be around, but if they've lost most of their cities or their important cities and lost resources, they don't have enough resource points to continue the war, then the war comes to an end. It's really not a very complicated game. It lasts for 4 years, from 1948, 49, 50, 51, 4 years. So it's not a very long game, but it is sort of a long game because each turn represents a month. So this is basically you've got 12 times 4. That's how many turns there can be in the game. It doesn't have to be. It could end much earlier. In fact, in playtesting, it has ended earlier. So it doesn't have to. That's the absolute outside length of the game. At the end of the year 1951, you count up. The war comes to an end. Whoever has the most resources and victory cities wins the game. And that is basically the description of Fall of the Eagle. If anybody's interested in having a copy, seeing this go out to the market so they can buy one, I will pursue finishing the manual, get a couple play testings done to get this thing done, and try to get it out, and so you can buy a copy. It's a pure war game, a lot of fun. Once again, a hypothetical subject, but it's historical at the same time, which I do like. And I made a number of block games. You saw the if you looked at my Star Trek games I did, they're blocks as well. I do like the block system because of the fog of war and the step point reduction and increase. It's very elegant and simple, and I really do enjoy those kinds of games. And if you enjoy them, this is maybe one for you. Well, that's all I have for this. Thanks for joining me on my game shelf, and I'll see you again next time.